70s that mainstream comics started breaking out of the code and tackling things they weren't allowed to talk about. Things like drug abuse.
Today, there's still all kinds of underground and political comic books out there. They talk about social issues like AIDS, gay rights, prejudice, and racism, even in the mainstream comic books. Most publishers don't do this to boost sales, though. In fact, publishers or retailers can get in trouble for it. They just have something important to say about important social issues. Dark Horse has consistently published socially relevant comic books that are also entertaining. We spoke to Mike Richardson, the founder of Dark Horse Comics.
It's interesting that in America, comic books are somehow pushed into the children's ghetto of literature. When you think of comics, or used to think of comics, you thought of superheroes. And pretty much since the late 50s, that's the way it's been. Superheroes basically have taken over the comic book industry. Dark Horse has a different approach. We publish a wide variety of subject matter in our comics for a wide variety of ages. For the traditional comic reader, you get a book like Concrete, you see this big hulking creature on the cover. If you're a traditional comic reader, you may think, oh, it's a monster. But when you actually pick it up and read it, it's the story about a speechwriter who has problems in his own personal life, who is trapped in this monstrous body, and then just tries to cope with the day-to-day things that happen to him. But we have a story coming up with the people who would spike trees at one extreme in the logging issues in the Northwest, and the people who would clear cut on the other extreme. We have no illusions that we can solve that, but at least we can make people aware of what's going on in a particular circumstance. Television, documentaries, motion pictures attempt to deal with issues and run the risk of failing too, and comics are no different.
Andrew Vax is a child welfare advocate and a lawyer who defends children. He's also a mystery novelist and a comic book writer, and quite recently he's developed a novel where Batman takes on one of the most serious crimes out there, child abuse.
I didn't choose comics or graphic novels to communicate my message or my cause. They were one of the many choices that I've made, and indeed I wouldn't limit the choices. I have but this one tune to play, and I'd play it on anybody's piano that they made available. So when comics opened up that opportunity, I just jumped through it. What's good is what works. And it's absolutely indisputable that some people will read comics and won't read books, and some people will listen to music and won't read comics, and some people will look at pictures on a wall that won't go to a library. All we're trying to do is reach as many people as intensely as possible. I came to write Batman thanks to Steve Corte. It was his idea that I would write a Batman book, knowing full well that what I'd be writing about, of course, is child abuse, which is all that I do. I've almost been thunderstruck by the way people have responded and the commitments they've made as a result of reading it. It was kind of amazing to me, the power of comics to communicate. If you want to protect children from the worst horror in my mind that there is, which is they're being commercially trafficked for sex like they were grains of rice. And if you're a person, if you're a man or you're a woman, I believe if you get this information, you will join us. If I had one wish, it would be that what I write is fiction.
The Heart and Lung Foundation utilized another Batman character, Commissioner Gordon, to discuss the problem of heart and lung disease. And I guess it's because the commissioner loved a cigar. We spoke with Denny O'Neil, the writer of the DC comic, and talked about ways in which social issues were tackled in the comic form.
My assumption was that it's too late for my generation. We're already too set in our thinking. We need to be creative when we're dealing with problems like the environment, like the seemingly unhealable breach between the races. We need new ideas. They were much more likely to come from 8-year-olds if the 8-year-olds could start thinking about this stuff early enough. DC gets involved with comics that deal with real issues, primarily when one or two individuals feel they have a story to tell about some real issue. Batman himself smoked a pipe in his earliest incarnation, before anybody really knew that there were any serious health problems. So instead of ignoring the problem or just quietly getting rid of Commissioner Gordon's smoking habit, we decided to address it directly. We did a year-long subplot in which Gordon has a heart attack and is forced to deal with a change of lifestyle. We did that in consultation with the American Heart Association, and eventually we did a public service ad for the American Heart Association. That's not as big as exciting as crime in the streets, but probably affects more people. If we can entertain by telling the truth, so much the better.
So this brings us to our anti-gravitational poll. What is socially relevant about comics? Here's what you had to say.
To tell you the truth, I'm a little tired of socially relevant causes, especially after 1995. What I'd really like to see in comics is more fuzzy animal stories.
Issues centering around global issues, age awareness.
The issue I'd like to see comic books address is how to avoid carjacking.
After this, Phil reviews some games with no redeeming social value. Then we're going to look at some artists and stuff. As always, fight the power. Thank you.
All right, this week we're taking a look at Kiliak, the DNA imperative for the Sony PlayStation. First off, it has this wicked opening sequence. Rendered, great story, bad acting, everything you want in a CD-ROM game. And I have to take this opportunity to tell you, make use of the Sony memory card in this game, because you'll get to like level 4, and if you die, forget it. You got to start all the way from the beginning. It's much like Doom. It's a shooter game, and once you start, it's a great game, actually. I liked it better than Doom. It has better controls. Basically, you're going through, you're seeking out this maze of tunnels underground. You're trying to stop a mad scientist from unleashing this weird DNA. You find computer cards. You find memory cards. You find opener cards to open certain doors, which is great. You find this great map card. All right, because in the game, you can only, like, certain places you find, that ends up on your map. But if you get a map card, it shows you the whole layout. It's a great game, good sound. When you're playing it alone with your stereo on, you're going like this. You're looking around because the sound is excellent. Kiliak, the DNA imperative, I have to give it a 4.5 out of 5 on the anti-gravity scale. I liked it better than Doom. I loved it.
This just in. Mission Incredible. Marvel Comics and Paramount Pictures are teaming up to launch a new comic book imprint. The first title, appearing in May, will be based on the movie Mission Impossible, starring Tom Cruise. And for Spawn and Witchblade fans, this April, Medieval Spawn and Witchblade meet and mingle for a 3-issue series written by Garth Ennis. The story is a prelude to The Darkness, the upcoming Mark Silvestri project. The results are in. KO, the winners of the DC vs. Marvel crossover, as voted on by 170,000 fans. Superman smashed the Hulk. Spider-Man pummeled Superboy. Batman bashes Captain America. Storm trampled Wonder Woman. Wolverine shredded Lobo. And Silver Surfer nuked Green Lantern. No food, no water. What comics would you like on a desert island?
The first issue is Superman Action Comics #1, because it was printed in the 1930s when they still used honest, cheap newsprint rather than the clay-coated super stock that today's comics are printed on. And I would find that more useful in starting a fire to stay warm or cook the rat I was able to catch.
Next up is Comicopious Reviews with Nick, our man in New York. A look at Vertigo and some girl talk.
Hey, what's up everybody, and welcome to Comicopia, my weekly review of comic books. First up, we've got one of my fave artists doing a new book. Yes, you guessed it, it's Humberto Ramos and X Nation #2. This comic follows the ever-trendy, but still awesome theme of teens dealing with their superpowers. In this issue, our prepubescent freaks miss curfew and flee a mutant nun who's dealing out their punishment. Ramos brilliantly combines American comic and Japanese manga styles. With an outcome that can only be described as amazing, I give this book 4.2 Gs on the anti-gravity scale. Next up, it's finally out! DEFCON 4 #1. And I know what you're thinking, but this is not the comic book adaptation of the movie from 10 years ago. This book presents the ever-popular method of jumping through time, which Image uses quite frequently. DEFCON 4 is the futuristic tale of a band of heroes defending themselves from creepy mutants with super-killing figure action. Ooh, scary. In addition, a very cool scene with 2 super-powered youngins rollerblading through Tokyo. I give this promising book 3.9 Gs on the anti-gravity scale. Next up, a very alternative indie book called Skeleton Key. First, I have to say that if you haven't read this book in the past, you're going to be a little lost if you start in this issue. This installment of the series shows our heroes dealing with the difficulties of modern life while wearing big Godzilla costumes. This comic is intriguing, but at times confusing, and therefore, I can only designate 3 out of 5 Gs on the anti-gravity scale. Last but not least, a comic with a good message, starring Bill. Okay, seriously, this book does have good intentions, as it was created to help kids through the difficulty of having to testify in court. I know I'm always a little jumpy when I go before the bench. Even though this book is educational, it does have pretty good art, very reminiscent of Good Guys from Defiant. Well, that's about it for Comicopia this week. Now we go to an interview with Howard Cruz, the creator of the critically acclaimed graphic novel, Stuck Rubber Baby.
I have always been interested in creating a long comic book work. 4 years of my life were taken up both writing and drawing the book. Stuck Rubber Baby is about the struggle that an individual has to find himself, to find out how he should behave in the world, what the moral thing to do is in a world that has racism in it, for example, and what importance he should place on being truthful with his friends when he's afraid for them to know that he's gay. I was in college in Birmingham, Alabama during the civil rights battles of the early 60s, and they had a huge impact on me and in my value system and on the ways I felt about myself and about people who were different from me. And I think most art comes from the heart of individuals. In the current political environment, we've abandoned so many of the values of unselfishness and caring about other people that I was raised to feel were important, that if you say, no, I resist that, I want to be concerned about those things, then some people will call you a radical. So in that sense, I accept the term with pride. We are a nonviolent crusade. We don't hit back. That's where we get our moral strength and our psychological leverage. Now, several people have told me that they saw Mabel hitting a police dog with her purse. Did you see her do that? Well, let me save you the trouble of hemming and hawing. We know she hit that dog with that purse. There were more than a few people around, and they all had eyes. But there have also been rumors that Mabel had a brick inside of that purse. Comics that simply regurgitate what comics have done before in the world of fantasy and superheroes tend to have a certain sameness about them. When an artist strikes out on his or her own and says, I'm going to draw about the world as I individually see it, that's inevitably pioneering.
Girl Talk is a new comic series presenting the lives of teenage girls as they actually are. Imagine that. Accuracy.
Hi. Girl Talk is a provocative new comic series that captures the uncensored voices of women talking amongst themselves. And I am privileged enough to be sitting here with the creators and artists of Girl Talk, Isabella, Anne, and Sabrina. And I would like to ask the first question of Isabella. Can you describe the format of Girl Talk?
It's a 40-page comic book, and we usually have anywhere from like 6 to 12 artists.
I think Girl Talk is an activist project in publishing, that we're opening up, pages for women to express themselves in a male-dominated field.
How did Girl Talk get started?
We were all working on an underground political comic book called World War III Illustrated, and as an editor, I noticed that a funny thing happened at meetings where women artists would maybe be quiet during the general meeting, but then they would come over to me afterwards and show me something personal that they had that they weren't quite ready to show the mixed group. And it seemed like one of those Girl Talk moments when the women just pull each other aside in the corner and say something a little more juicy. So it seemed like it would be a good idea to have a book that showed that side of what we talk about when men aren't around.
And to what extent are your personal lives on the pages of this, do you find?
Oh, very much so. Most of the stories, not all, but most of the stories are autobiographical.
It really gave me a place where I could write stories in comic form about the kind of things that I like to read novels about. Real life issues, what your relationships are, how are you going to work out your life's work in relationship to your family and your personal life.
Okay, here's one for you. What are some of the greatest challenges you're finding in the graphic novel arena?
One of the problems with it is really more inherent in the market. that comic shops are a real male ghetto. And we're really speaking to a female audience. We don't mind if the boys read it too. I think it would probably do them some good. But it's hard to reach a female audience because most girls don't go in comic shops because they're not used to seeing a lot of stuff for them in comic shops.
What topics have you covered thus far that you're most proud of?
We've done stories that mean a lot to the women that do them, and you know, we're glad we're a place where people can contribute their most challenging and controversial work.
And do you see, it's like Love and Rockets? Do you ever read?
I love Love
Yeah,
and
me too.
Rockets.
That's
Yeah.
really good. That's really one of the...
Crossover book.
That's good, and Why I Hate Saturn is a good graphic novel. You'd really like that. That's very good. I'm sorry, I did not mean to digress. Please continue.
It's very natural.
Another interesting topic is women-to-women relationships, friends, sisters, mother-daughter. We'll probably always have stories about male-female relationships.
DC's Vertigo line has always tried to be the higher standard of comics art. Titles they've published include Alan Moore's V for Vendetta, which deals with strong political themes like fascism versus freedom. Karen Berger, the editor at Vertigo, had this to say.
I'm Karen Berger. I'm the executive editor at Vertigo at DC Comics. We publish comics for adults, and we're launching a sub-imprint of Vertigo called Vertigo Verite. And Vertigo Verite is a line of comics that's totally real-world, real-life based. Some of the stuff that I'm working on right now is Dog Moon, which is a graphic novel written by Robert Hunter, the chief lyricist of the Grateful Dead. The other graphic novel that we're publishing is 7 Miles a Second. It's the autobiography of David Wojnarowicz, and it's written by David, of course, and drawn by James Romberger. David Wojnarowicz was a contemporary artist. He overcame tragic and horrific beginnings as a small child, and he was a child prostitute at the age of 8, had obviously horrible relationships with his parents. He was abandoned, beaten, sexually, emotionally abused, and he really overcame such a harrowing and distressing background and became an artist and used art as the expression for his innermost feelings. And it's brilliant and beautiful and haunting and disturbing, but true to life, and we're very proud to be publishing it.
After this, it's viewer mail, and we kick off the revolution. Power to the people, y'all. Time once again for the mail, and woo! Luke Erickson writes, who do you think would win if Star Wars went to war with Star Trek? Well, I'd have to say that a Star Destroyer would wipe out the Enterprise, but I'd also have to say that Captain Kirk would take Yoda outside and give him a big can of whoop. There it is.
We've received a lot of mail about Gotcha Man as well. You may have seen a re-edited version of the cartoon in the 70s called Battle of the Planets, with Jason, Princess, Keop, etc. Coffee, please? Thanks, doll. No one ever explained to Zoltan, though, that building a giant robot and attacking something every week is an exercise of futility. Thank you. Now this week's poll question. If you were Galactus and you were going to eat the planet, what kind of sauce would you use? Good question.
Please feel free to send us any of your artwork. Thank you.
Well, that's it. It looks like a lot of comics make a really serious effort to try and take on the issues of the day. But there's one thing that they've forgotten.
That's right, Phil. The state of snack foods in this country is utterly ridiculous. Chocolate bars are either waxy and or crumbly. I can't remember the last time I had a truly delightful frozen yogurt. People, let's get it together and write our congressman. We deserve better cream-filled pastries. Who's with me? Huh? Who's with me?
Explorers in space discover a world where man is the animal and evolution has favored the simian race. For the first time on television, the original letterboxed edition of Planet of the Apes. Today at 2 p.m. Eastern, Sci-Fi Sunday. The Buzz discovers more ghosts in the Hollywood Hills, plus Terry Farrell of Deep Space Nine on Sci-Fi Buzz, next.